What's up, TikTok? We are live. And my God, it is a beautiful day out here today. Yoa, how you doing? Thanks for joining. We're gonna have a fun talk today about things that are taught in elite private schools that are denied to the rest of us. Things that, if we understand as parents, we can use to better position our children so that they can get that job that they want that is out of reach to other children, right? So they can get that internship they want that is out of reach to other people. They can get that apprenticeship they want that could set them up to own a business by the time they're 18, 19 years old. There are subtle differences in the things that are taught at these elite private schools compared to what the general public is taught and the box we're supposed to stay in, right? Because one of the things that school does is it teaches us that we are to stay in our lane, right? And I covered that in the last few days with the 7 lessons that are very efficiently taught in public schools. So, quick review. How did public school come to be what it is today? And if you missed it, I do repost these streams on YouTube, but parents who understand the history of the schooling system pull their children out because they understand that no amount of funding or teacher change or curriculum change can fix something that's so fundamentally flawed from its base level up. And that's what the public schooling system is. So yesterday we went all the way back to the 1800s, and we talked about Napoleon. Well, how does that apply to what's happening in schools today? Well, Napoleon was fighting the Franco-Prussian War, and he wiped Prussia. He beat them so bad, beat them like a drum, that when the Prussian generals said, "Forward, hold the line," their soldiers actually turned around and ran away from Napoleon's armies. Can you imagine that? So Prussia got whooped, and after they got whooped, their leadership, and I do have to be a little bit quicker today because my wife needs to be somewhere at 1, so she always accommodates me, and I'll certainly accommodate her. By the way, I'm very interactive, so if you have any questions about what I'm talking about or anything that relates to your child, feel free to jump in, let me know, and I am more than happy to answer your questions. The Messenger, hey, thanks for being here. Robert, thanks for being here. So, Napoleon whoops Prussia, their soldiers turn and run, and afterwards, the Prussian government gets together and they say, okay, how can we prevent this from happening in the future? So they got together the leading psychologists, for lack of a better term, of the time, the leading social engineers, and they came up with, well, you can guess it, they came up with the very system that is implemented all around the world today in public schools. Man, that sun is beating here today. But how could why was a system that was created in Prussia designed by psychologists to create an obedient populace that doesn't question authority and is willing to run into certain death if the government tells them to, why would that system be in the United States of America, in the modern world? Why is that system implemented not just in America, but all over the world today? Well, in the 1950s, there were congressional hearings, and there was a committee called the Reese Committee, right? So the Reese Committee was able to investigate some of these big tax-exempt foundations, right? The Carnegie Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and they got access to their white papers, they got access to their corporate minutes and their meeting notes going back 50 years. So a good congressman, a member of the Reese Committee, his name was Norman Dodd. He was able to get access to the records of these big tax-exempt foundations. And what he found, dating back to about 1910, were that the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, and a few other tax-exempt foundations got together, and they discussed how they can create a more obedient populace that doesn't question authority. Because you got to understand, at the time, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, these were the robber barons, right? So they had these huge monopolies, and America was transforming from being that agricultural culture into that industrialized corporate culture. So they wanted to create a population that would happily do one task, push papers, be where they're told, when they're told to be there, without questioning the doctrine of authority and the centralized narratives that are coming from the authority that they controlled, whether that be the newspapers or, the government, whatever it might be. Because when you have that type of money, you control all of these apparatuses. So these big tax-exempt foundations, they get together and they put together a plot to take over the American education system. So they did their research, and they found that Prussia was having a lot of success since the Franco-Prussian War. That in the 1860s, 1870s, Prussian soldiers turned and ran away, disobeying the orders of their generals when they were told to hold their line. And just 40 years later, the Prussian population had become very obedient to authority. By the way, if you know your geography, you could extrapolate where this would eventually lead to with Prussia. What a world, what a world, what a world, my friends. By the way, as I said, I'm very interactive, so if you have any questions, anything specific to what I'm talking about, or your child, or homeschooling, feel free to jump in, because I'm more than happy to answer your questions and interact with my crowd, and we have a lot of fun here. So my only rule is no despair. So if your thought is, oh my God, people are coming to get us, I don't care. So the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, they did their research, and they said, wow, this Prussian education system is very effective at creating an obedient population. So they decided that they would spread this education system through the United States of America, and eventually they would spread this education system all over the world, and it's the education system that we know and love so much today. Well, how did they do that? Well, I think public school is fine as long as they are... Okay. Right. You're in the wrong saloon, partner. But that's fine. Everyone has their opinion. So they decided they wanted to spread this compulsory education system all around the world, because if Prussia could take their population that would disobey generals and run away from a battle and make them amongst the most obedient population in the world in just 1 or 2 generations. I was joking. I was hoping to get you going. All right, no joke zone. Second rule. First rule, no despair. Second rule, no jokes. No, that's cool, though. That's cool. But, I don't like to put down people that have an opposite view on that. I don't mind, people, you want to get medical procedures you want. Where I draw the line is when they start using coercion to take desperate people and force them to do things against their will. And, it's like, oh, you're not forcing them. Well, what they're doing is satanic, right? They're telling people that are in financial trouble that if they don't get a medical procedure that they're going to lose their job, right? They're going to lose their house. They won't be able to put food on the table. You can't go to the grocery store. You can't feed your children. So this is very satanic stuff, and this is this is what happens when enough people get away from the founding principles of America and morality and doing the right thing. There's mask mandates where I live. I'm on vacation right now. I'm at my parents' house in another state. Where I live, but no one wears them, and no one bothers anyone about anything because it's just a moral town. People don't treat each other that way. And if someone wants to wear a mask or they're happy about getting a medical procedure, I'm more than happy for them. That's great. You live your life. You make the decision that you think is best for you. But trying to force me to, or not even just me, but people who are in more desperate situations, coercing them to get medical procedures or do things that are against their will, it's a really bad thing, and it's not the society you want to live in. And, on top of that, if you understand things like I don't even know if I want to bring it up because the algorithm, but there are not mandatory, there are reporting systems that doctors are supposed to report to when people get injured after certain medical procedures. But unfortunately, a Harvard study found about 5 years ago that only 1% of these type of injuries are reported to the system. But even with that 1% number, if you go check the system, and you can check it for yourself, sorry, I have to talk in hobo code, you'll find that many, many people have died from thousands of people have passed as a result of getting certain medical procedures. And then, of course, there's Bell's palsy, neurological problems, heart attacks, and all other types of issues. So, I have a big problem with people that are okay with using this type of coercion, because the way I see it is they just like to outsource their horror, right? They're like the person that eats chicken every day, but then calls the chicken farmer, who does the dirty work, a bad person. Well, you're butchering that chicken too, right? Right? By eating the chicken, you're butchering the chicken. You're just outsourcing your horror. Well, people that support this type of coerced consent, right, or compliance, they are just outsourcing their horror. And to me, someone who supports that is no different than a person that pulls a gun on my child and puts a gun to my child's head. And that's all I have to say about that. My name is Forrest Grump. I'm from Greenbow, Alabama. By the way, if you missed my earlier streams, I do post these on YouTube. Love the preach-hands. Thank you. Classical Learner YouTube page. So, anyway, these big tax-exempt foundations, they got together and they realized that the Prussian education system was very effective at taking a population in just 2 generations, right? 40 years. So that's, 2 full generations of school children, basically. Taking a population that did not listen to authority, and within 40 years, turning them into one of the most obedient populations in the world. So they said, okay, this is the schooling system that we need to implement here and all around the world, because if we do that, we'll have our corporate workers. They won't question us. They'll do as they're told. They won't question big narratives. They won't call to break up our trusts anymore, right? Rockefellers, they were having difficulty with the population calling for the oil company monopolies to be broken up, right? So if we just take over the education system, it could solve all of these problems. And what they did was, and if you want to know, where's he getting this from? So Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. Hey, Brady.
Daddy, look what Les gave me.
Oh, cool. You got a balloon? What are you going to do with it?
Dad, could you blow it up?
Can I blow it up?
Yeah.
Well, I'm on a stream right now.
Please?
All right, let me just... Can you take it to Mama?
No, but she's not blowing it up. She has to pee.
Oh, well, she's out of the bathroom now.
No, she has a little bit of brushing her teeth.
Oh, she's brushing her teeth?
I'll do it.
Thanks, love. My little boy with a balloon. I'd show him to you, but he has a shirt on and...
No pants.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he has pants on under that shirt. And
No pants on.
yeah, so... Anyway.
Look at this cool sweater.
I love that shirt.
All right, come on. See you later, Dad.
Later, Brady. He has a balloon. Where was I? Sorry about that. I feel like such a pleb that the social pressure they want. Well, you know what? You got to stand your ground, and part of standing our ground is getting into a less desperate situation. Like that's why I sold my home to get out of debt. I moved my family across the country. We purchased farmland, so now we don't have debt. We're growing our own food. I run a small business. I homeschool my children. So when you start to take all of these actions, you become less controllable. And one of the most important things you can do is prioritize family and community, which is why I always help people publish books, right? They inbox me. I help them publish their books. I do that for free. I'm going to set up an apparatus where I could promote your businesses, because if you have community, you support one another, well, then it becomes very difficult for these people that like to butcher the chicken, but act like they don't butcher the chicken. It's very difficult for them to get leverage over you, right? So these big tax-exempt foundations, they decided they were going to replicate the Prussian education system. So Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, very incestual family, very gross, very satanic, was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, was brought in by the Rockefeller Foundation, the government, all these big tax-exempt foundations. And he, in his book Propaganda, talks about how they took over the education system. And what they did, been fighting for medical freedom in California for 7+ years. Yes, I've been in this fight as well, long before the events of the last, whatever it is now, 20 months. But it's some of these places are just, they've separated so far from their morality that their population is willing to give in to a certain type of tyranny. And, California and New York, these are lost territories. And, people are like, oh man, like Gavin Newsom, right? He's so terrible. Well, the truth is, the people of California deserve him. The people of New York deserve Governor Cuomo. It's being imposed on minorities, but the majority of the population, this is what they want, right? So people get what they ask for. We truly do have a government that, believe it or not, and I'm the most anti-government person there is, I don't know the most, but we are governed by the consent of the governed, because, for example, the place I live, that's nice that there's a statewide mask mandate, but in the town that I live and the towns next adjacent, there's no authority. There's no implementation, because 90% of the population will push back against it. And once enough people push back, they don't have the enforcement power. So we truly are a country that requires the consent of the governed. The problem is people are so detached from their morality. They're so detached from God and right from wrong that populations are very easy to control, right? Which is why they just pump a little fear through the brainwashing machine on everybody's wall, or the one that they carry in their pockets. People get afraid and they let the government do, whatever the government wants to do. That's unfortunate. But that's because they came through public school. It's bad out there, yeah. Brainwashed, they can't think for themselves. Yeah, it's sad, but in another way, I think a lot of them really want it. Like, they want that government daddy, right? It's why they use every government program they get. They don't want to get a job, right? The government, basically 20 months ago, rolled out full-on socialism, right? With everyone in the country having money injected to them, right? Like the whole country being basically put on universal basic income. And the people just love it. They don't want to go out and get jobs. They don't use their time, like their free time that the government just gave them this money to start businesses. So consent to the governed. What are my thoughts on France trying to ban homeschooling? Well, the people there better fight back, and if they ban homeschooling, they better figure out the laws and how to set up private schools, because let's say there's 10 million people that can't homeschool anymore but don't want to send their children to public school. Well, all you have to do is partner up with about 5-10 of those in your state, start a little private school with the homeschool parents, and then you have your nice little private homeschool. So there are ways around everything. There is no despair. There has never been a time in human history where there aren't bad people coming for you. Your ancestors worried about Vikings showing up on their shore in boats, killing their men, doing you-know-what to their women, and enslaving their children. So, there's always bad people. Who cares? The answer The answer to bad people is morality, and that's how you win. Right? You know, like, you got to take the ticket. You got to take the ticket. So it's like a lot of people, the scenarios I talked about, where they're in debt, right, and their employer says you need to do this or you lose your job, and like now they have to do something they don't want to do, right, because they're worried about losing their house, right? They have a mortgage. Well, the problem is they took the ticket of that banking money, and that banking money is Satan. That banking money that's usury. It's one of the worst sins in the Bible. And when you do that, you put yourself in a position where you could be controlled. So, you know, yes, there's people that are in debt, unfortunately, because of circumstance, and that happens. Sometimes we have to use that tool. But the sad thing is most people are in debt because of culture, because they're brainwashed and told you have to go to college in order to be successful in life, and because, you know, they want to keep up with the Joneses. You got to get that house, got to get those cars, got to get that boat, and then they become very desperate, very controllable, right? People, they drink alcohol to excess, they watch pornography to excess, they live their lives in a certain way that they're very easily controlled. You can pump fear through the screen. They spend their time, like all these men that spend their time obsessing about sports. Like when I grew up, I obsessed about sports because that's what I was taught that's what boys do, right? But then I became a man and I realized that professional football and baseball and basketball are no different than the Roman Colosseum and the gladiators, right? You give them bread and circus and they will never rebel. Well, how true is that? How many men, capable, strong men that should be alpha males leading society? You were obsessed when I met you. Yes, I was, my beautiful wife. How many men that should be alpha males leading society, fighting back against tyranny, just spend their time yelling at a bunch of other grown men, throwing a ball back and forth on the screen, being paid by a bunch of billionaires who hate you, who hate your children, who pump propaganda through the screens, who promote these athletes as false idols, right? False idol worship. This is all biblical. So anyway, Edward Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he worked for the Rockefeller Foundation. And what they did was they offered $10,000 grants to, stand up. That's my back. Been traveling last week, and when I sit too much, it hurts my back. So they offered $10,000 grants to any school that would implement the Prussian education system, right? Their curriculum, their education model. And at the time, like 1910, right? Around that time, 1910, 1920, $10,000 was a lot of money. So, just like today, they say, oh, Bill Gates is such an amazing philanthropist. Look what he's doing for us with all this medical stuff. Oh, praise Bill Gates. Well, right? They did the same thing. Look what the Rockefellers are doing, the Carnegies are doing. These are such philanthropists. They're giving all these grants to schools, and they're modernizing their education system, and they're having core curriculum so that children learn all the important things like the Pythagorean theorem. Oh, sometimes I laugh when I mispronounce words. They're learning all these important things like the Pythagorean theorem and, whatever, all the garbage that we learn in school, right? And everyone said, oh, this is so wonderful. And before you know it, schools all over the country were implementing this education system. And then, once you get enough people behind it, then they actually came in with government regulations. And, the rest is history, right? You get the Department of Education and you get all of the nonsense. And they control it the same way. It's just instead of using their money, they use your money now. So now they go to the schools and they say, well, if you want to receive federal funding in your school, then you better have trans story hour, right? Whatever it is they say, like these very satanic things. And before you know it, these public schools are just government indoctrination centers, right? And of course, when I say government indoctrination centers, you have to understand what I mean by the government, because the big tax-exempt foundations, right? If you ever want to know who your master is, right, who's in control, you find out who doesn't pay taxes and who you're not allowed to credit, right? Like if you turn on the news, you'll hear, oh my God, white people are the bad man. White people are the bad man. White people are the bad man. Well, if white people were the bad man, you wouldn't be allowed to say white people are the bad men. It's amazing I have to explain this to people. But, I mean, this stuff's just so abundantly obvious, right? And then it's just everything. I mean, there's layers to it. I don't want to get too into it, but there's layers to all of this mind control that they go through. So they took over the education system, and what they do to young black children is horrible, and they're not to blame either. It's like they put these children in school, and they say, you're a victim, you're oppressed, you're a victim, you're oppressed, you're a victim, you're oppressed. Take that government money, you deserve it. Take that government money. Come on, look, the white kid next to you, he's oppressing you. Oh, little Matthew, you're an oppressor. Kwamel, oh man, Kwamel, you can't make it in this world. You got to have things given to you. You can't make it. Like, these are horrible messages that they're giving to little children, and they're doing it to divide them. When in reality, both Matthew and Kwamel were made equally beautiful, beautiful children made equally in God's kingdom, in God's image. White, black, and God's image. Another thing that I just, it's so hilarious is like, I saw someone post like, of Diamond, and he was like, just so you whites know, Jesus was Middle Eastern, so he actually had black skin. You think I care? You think I care what color skin Jesus had? You think that matters to me? You think, oh, I like Jesus because his white skin. I mean, how vain do you have to be? And do you think that I thought that depiction of my Savior bleeding on a cross represented Jesus Christ? Never worship false idols. The kingdom of heaven lives inside of you. The kingdom of heaven is in your soul. My connection to Jesus isn't some picture of him or his skin color. And like that type of thinking is so low frequency, so low vibration that you would only see it on the mainstream news. Because when you tap into your divinity and you realize that everything is part of God's plan, it changes your whole outlook on life. So all of a sudden, when the country gets shut down and businesses get shut down and you lose your job and you're not allowed to talk on social media and everyone that agrees with you is banned from social media, you keep a positive outlook because you realize that everything's part of God's plan, and if it's happening, you're supposed to learn from it, and all you can do is adjust and do better, right? I can't control all these outside forces, but I can control the man in the mirror. Look inside you and you will find the kingdom of heaven. And that doesn't come from a priest, and that doesn't come from a church. Because I know so many these child priests, so many of these pedophile priests and people's bad experiences and these corrupt churches that are really just tax havens so that the priests could get rich. That are really just tax havens so the priests could get rich. They sour people's connection to God and divinity. They sever it before people realize how connected they are and how special they are. So true. There's a simple song we grew up with. Jesus loves the little children. He absolutely does, which is why one of the worst things you can do according to the Bible is misleading children. And I believe that's what the public school system does, and that's why I devote my life. My purpose here is to lead them right. In fact, I was on Twitter at Classic Learner on Twitter, and I don't use it as much anymore. And someone posted, if you won $5 million, how long would you take off of work? And my answer was, I would not take one day off of work. I have purpose in my life. And when you find your purpose, right, everyone always asks, what's the key to happiness? The key to happiness is to stop pursuing happiness and to find your purpose. Because when you find your purpose, the reason that God put you here, then all of that materialistic bullshit, it doesn't affect you in the same way. And it's not that I don't want money. I need money, right? Like, I have to take care of my family. They need shelter, they need food, and all of these things are necessary. But the problem is when people lose their connection to God, fear and money become their God, right? And that's why if you look at a dollar bill, there's a big all-seeing eye pyramid on top of it, and it says, "In God we trust." Yeah, well, what God do you think those bankers are talking about? By the way, I also find the word trust on the back of a dollar bill interesting. In God we trust, right? Trust has multiple meanings. There's the trustee of an account, right? You give your children a trust account, right? By the way, you should all have trust accounts for your children. This is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. I personally have an UTMA account for my children. And when they're 18, 19, 20 years old, I'm going to, because I'll have that UTMA account for 20 years, be able to hand them a relatively large sum of money to get them started, and of course with a good financial education. Trust, a trust account. I'm wondering if I want to get into the law of the living and the law of the dead. I'll save that for another stream. Well, basically, right, like your name on government documents is written in all capital letters. Right, like everyone's been watching the Britney Spears documentary lately, and like if you look at the court documents they show on that, it's Britney Spears in big capital letters, right? If you look at your driver's license, your name's written in capital letters. Well, that's because you are the beneficiary of a trust that was created in your name when you were issued a birth certificate as a child. But anyway, I'll get into that another day. That's an important thing to teach our children, right? That's why I laugh when people are like, if people don't want to spend $10 a month to join my homeschool community. Like, this is shit your children should know. This is important stuff that, like, I don't see many other educational bodies showing their flock how to teach their children these things. Promo code CONNECT, $10 a month, Homeschool's Connected. I never thought to get a trust of mine because I grew up with different thinking. Yeah, you need literally $10 to start a trust. And that's why, like, public school brainwashes people so good, because they're like, oh, that's something the rich does. The rich know how to not pay taxes. Okay, so you do realize if the rich know how to not pay taxes, then within what is legal, you could figure out how to do that as well. Now, always pay what is legal. My point is that if you start a corporation, for example, you can then write off many of your activities, right? You lower your income bracket, and then you're not paying as many taxes, but you're reinvesting the money back into your family, right? So these are all things that these big corporations understand how to do, and these are all things that we can understand how to do and we could teach our children how to do, but we're just so conditioned to know. You just send your children to public school. We're going to make them nice corporate worker bees that don't question authority so they can work for the Rockefeller Foundation. And, they can work for a corporation for 45 years for $10 an hour, get a kick on the ass on the way out the door, and a watch. I digress. So anyway, they leveraged the education system, and they basically took the Prussian education model, and they spread it throughout all of the world, and now there's a reason. That's why I laugh when people are like, world government, I don't see it. I'm like, you don't see that every country in the entire world uses the same education system? These things don't happen by accident, but you got to stop thinking of the government as the politicians, because the politicians answer to the people that fund them, and the people that fund them fund politicians all over the world. So although it might not be technically like a one world government, right? There's different jurisdictions. It does in many ways already operate as that Babylonian beast system in unison. For those of you not familiar with the reference in the Bible, Babylon is basically what people call the New World Order is described in the Bible. It's called Babylon, rebuilding the Tower of Babel, right? Anyway, again, I digress. They do not teach our kids to question like they did us. They are only taught to listen and obey. Well, that gets me into the 7 lessons taught in school, and that's a great transition. So the first lesson taught in school, and I'm going to sum this up. I'm going to go over the topic of this stream, which is the theory of access that you should all understand. And then I do have to wrap it up because my wife has to be somewhere. But what time is it? I can't see what time it is. Anyone know what time it is? Let's see what time it is. I told my wife I would not go more than an hour. 12:36. Oh, perfect. We're making perfect time. All right. So the 7 lessons taught in public school are confusion, right? Everything's taught out of context. Like your children are calculating surface area because they're given a formula, right? They're calculating surface area, but it's just an equation they're given on a piece of paper. It doesn't mean anything to them. But if you have them build a garden box, or like this is a deck right here, right? Right, I'm sitting on a deck. Well, if little Johnny goes out with dad and dad's going to build a deck on the house and little Johnny is going to help him, well, then you say, all right, we need to calculate the surface area. And then you're giving it context, right? So it's not confusing. But school teaches everything out of context. It's confusing. The second lesson, which kind of ties in with the first, is indifference, right? When am I ever going to use this? And we've all heard children say that. And the secret that they won't tell you that most teachers know, at least honest teachers, is that when children ask that, these teachers don't have a good answer because they are correct. Children, they're instinctually correct. Most of the garbage we learn in school, we're never going to use. Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't learn things, but if that's the case, education should shift to focus more. It should centrally focus on skills that children could develop that they can use throughout their life to be entrepreneurs, to make money, to earn a living, to go about their everyday life skills, right? And then you should also teach subject matter. This is why I always tell parents, when you are educating your children, skills over subject matter, not that subject doesn't matter, but you need to teach your children construction, engineering, cooking, photography, videography, all of these skills, engineering, anything you can teach them that that will give them value in this world, right? Which is why, like, people laugh, you put on the show, are you smarter than a 5th grader? No one's smarter than a 5th grader. Well, how long do you have to see that to say, okay, so all the shish they're teaching us in school is nonsense? The American education system is fundamentally broken from its foundation. It should be demolished, ripped down to its seams. And a new system should be created. And we create that every day. And I'm creating that with what I'm doing with my private homeschool community and everything we're doing in there. And we're doing some really good things. And you should be a part of it. I'll tell you. By the way, if you use the Connect, it's $10 a month. I homeschool and teach gardening, construction, and cooking too. You are crushing. And all you have to do now is, so like everything you do, you want to mix entrepreneurialism into what your children are doing because you're creating a mindset, right? So if your child is gardening and cooking, you have them grow their food. Then after they grow it, you have them cook a meal and you have them sell that meal. You have them set up a mock farmer's market. You show them how to do cool things like some basic marketing, and maybe they make cookies and then they market those cookies to the neighbors and say, I can make these cookies every Friday and deliver them to your door at a weekly price of $5 a week, right? Hey, there's a concept that works. A million little Rockefellers emerge. You thought Eminem was the only white rapper. Everything you do, skills over subject matter, and entrepreneurship. So confusion, indifference. The next lesson is intellectual dependency. That is that truth comes from authority and that truth comes from the textbook, right? And if you disagree with what the teacher says, if you disagree with the textbook, you are wrong. Truth comes from authority, and this is why so many people in our society today are unable to question official government narratives, are unable to question official corporate narratives, are unable to question the mainstream media and the narratives that are pushed in Hollywood. They just accept these things as true because to them, authority is God. So a scientist wearing a lab coat is no different than a priest. But just like many priests have been corrupted in the modern world and all throughout history, many scientists are corrupted in the modern world and all throughout history. But it doesn't matter because they're so conditioned that truth comes from authority because of the school system that they can't distinguish the difference between someone hiding behind the authority of science versus the scientific method, right? Like the medical stuff going on now, they say, oh, the studies have been done. You can't do long-term studies on something that was just released, right? What do you mean the study has been done? You are the study. You are the research. And I don't know about you, but I don't always trust the data. I'm not making any claims because, the authoritarians, they don't like when people call out LIES, right? So I have to talk in hobo code. Confusion, indifference, intellectual dependency, provisional self-esteem. You only get the praise of the teacher if you're doing what the teacher says to do. So, if you decide to do something to deviate from the norm, then you're sent to the principal's office, right? You're said to be a bad apple, but if you do exactly what authority tells you, you're doing a good job, and now your self-esteem is higher. My son is already excited to build a greenhouse. Yes. Oh, after my last live stream. That's awesome. Yeah, build that greenhouse and make sure he really understands the importance of the process. And then if he does it well, I don't know how old he is, but like if he's a teenager, when all of his friends are doing summer jobs, he could start like a small business where he's offering to build greenhouses for people around the town. Obviously, he's 6, he can't do that yet. But the point is you want to think that way and get his mindset to be that way. Provisional self-esteem, emotional dependency. So we know that truth comes from authority, right? And the way that's reinforced is emotional dependency. So if you go against the official narrative of something that happened in history, something that happened in the current world, well, you get a big C, D, or F put on your paper, right? You are only a smart child if you agree with that authority, right? Outsource your thinking to authority and be obedient to authority. This is how you create the population we see today. Class position, always know your place. May I go to the bathroom? It's 8 a.m., you better be in math class. It's 9 a.m., you better be in science class. Go where you were told, when you were told to be there, and do what you were told to do. The same exact structure as a corporate work environment. And remember how this talk started. This was the education system that the Rockefellers and the Carnegies wanted when they were transitioning America and the mindset of America from being a out on the frontier, sovereign, agricultural society to a city-dwelling, dependent, corporate industrial society. So it's no coincidence that the American education system is structured in the same way as a corporate workday. And the last lesson taught in public school is that one cannot hide, that if you try to pass a note in class, the teacher will intercept your note and read your private communication with another student. That if you go in the hallway, there will be monitors. If you go to the bathroom, there will be monitors. If you are not where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there, you will be reported and you will have to answer to authority. One cannot hide. Which is why the population has been conditioned to be so comfortable with the NSA doing bulk data collection. It's even worse at school now. My son is a senior, and he said that his school is more like a prison. Yeah, well, that's another story. It's also not a coincidence that school is structured like prisons. I mean, you even have to walk through metal detectors. And when you act out and you get in trouble, they put you in solitary confinement. Sound familiar? So John Taylor Gatto, who was the New York City Teacher of the Year 1988, 1989, 1990, and who was a pioneer of a lot of the stuff I'm talking about now. If you want to read his books, Dumbing Us Down, Weapons of Mass Instruction. Kind of funny how we all rebelled against the school. Yeah, it's the people that rebelled against the school system that are rebelling against authority now. I find that's true in droves. So John Taylor Gatto did a deep dive into the 14 lessons that are, and he found 14 lessons that are taught at the elite private schools in the country. And this is the one I wanted to touch on today, right? Because we talked a lot about authority. Well, one of those lessons is the theory of access. And when we come through the college system, right? Like, we're told that you go to high school, you get good grades. You go to college, you get good grades. You go where you're told when you're told to be there. You do what work you're told to be. And then you get, I just finished an audiobook by Gatto. That's fantastic. Change your perspective on things, right? So when we come through the corporate work system, when we come through the schooling system, we go to college, and then, okay, now it's time to apply to college. And I remember the college I went to, they had, and this is uniform throughout the country, they had these whole seminars that we had to attend, which were all about creating resumes and sending them out. And we were told that if we wanted to get a job, that you have your college transcript, right? You have your resume, and you create your resume, and you email that or you mail that in to a corporation that, or whatever it is, an institution that you would like to employ you. And you wait in line, and you be very formal. I remember I was told political correctness was always at the top of the line. When you send out emails, you better address people professionally. Dear Mr. blah, blah, blah. Well, sorry, college. I like to start my emails with, hey. Is that bad? And I definitely don't use politically correct language, because that is the language of slaves. Remind me of the scene from Braveheart, where William Wallace is talking to the Queen, and she offers him a chest of gold, and he says, gold, silver, shall I become Judas? And the Queen says, peace is made in such ways. And before she even finishes, peace is made in such, slaves are made in such ways. Tell your king that William Wallace will not be ruled, nor will any Scotsman while I live. Love Mel Gibson. He's not politically correct. Look what they did to him. Slaves are made in such ways. So you put out your resume, and you wait for that corporation to give you a job. And what a terrible thing to teach children. To always be beholden to others, to show them that they're not special, they're just like everyone else. Because what children in these elite private schools are taught is the theory of access. And it's more applicable today than any time in American history, because today we have email, we have Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all of these avenues in which you could communicate directly with people. I mean, I run a business, right? And I can't tell you how many impressive young people have approached me with help they needed with things, and sure enough, right, I'm happy to help them, right? Oh, daddy needs to come take over. All right, it's daddy daycare time. So theory of access, just real quick. So basically what you want to do is teach your children that they can knock on doors and show people that they have value. So rather than just putting out resumes, you can knock on the CEO's door, whether that's physical or metaphorically, right? Maybe you could send them an email. Maybe you could send them a video. You knock on their door, and you could offer to work for them 2 weeks for free. You can let them know why you're more valuable than the other applicants. You could tell them, like, just by the fact that I'm here, you can see how ambitious I am. And this is what I plan to do for your company. And this is what I'll do in the next 10 years. And this is what I want to do in the long run. And here's exactly what I'm going to do and how I'm going to make you money, right? And I'll do that for free. And I'll work for you for free for the first month, right? Who do you think that CEO who's trying to build his company, that puts all his sweat, blood, and tears into that company, who do you think he wants? That's the theory of access. And later or next week, I'm going to be talking about a parent consultation I did. I'm going to talk about a parent consultation I did last night in which I'm implementing the theory of access with a child, and I'm going to get him on a track to become a real estate mogul by the time he's 18 years old. At least that's the plan. So anyway, I'm going to talk about that next week. That's the theory of access. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you want to schedule a consultation, you could do that through my website. If you want to schedule a more basic consultation, you could do that through my profile on TikTok. My books are available on my profile on TikTok as well. And I'm here to help. So guys, this has been a lot of fun. But when the wife calls, a smart man is best to help her out. So, all right, guys. Remember, freedom isn't free. We have to earn it every day. I'll be back Monday, 12 o'clock. God bless.